Yeah, good morning everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm a couple of months into the role now and really great to one of the early engagements with the Brahman Association. For the last 18 months I was the CEO of Herefords Australia, and Marsha and I think we met when we were over at Neogen Lab, and I saw in your program you guys were there yesterday, is that right? Yeah. And there's a lot that I think we can do at breed association levels, really the engine room of genetic progress in the industry. And I guess my talk today is looking at, I've started at the other end, looking at customer and consumer, what's happening in global markets, what's the demand outlook, to then how do we unpack that with where we need to go next in the industry. Because one of the first jobs that I've been given is to lead the development of MLA's next 5-year plan. And our plan operates under the meat industry strategic plan, Red Meat 2030. So that's a 10-year time horizon when that plan was developed. And I think a lot of the operational context, as we heard from the last speaker as well, has changed a lot over the last 5 years, and certainly shaping our investments for where we land in 2030 is a really important time. So how we engage on that and get feedback from you in this room and more broadly is really important. So Marsha, jump into the next one. Since coming back into the role, there has been a change in our peak industry landscape. Cattle Australia is the new representative body for grass-fed cattle producers. So hopefully everyone's familiar with the way we're structured. So the peak industry councils sit under a collective banner under RMAC, which is the Red Meat Advisory Council. That's designed to be the single voice for the red meat industry into Canberra. Then you have each sector being represented by ALEC looking after live export, AMIC, the Processing Council. We've got the Lot Feeders Association for grain-fed, Cattle Australia for grass-fed, Sheep Producers Australia for sheep, so lamb and mutton, and GEICO is the Goat Industry Council. So then we've got the service companies with MLA. We're the largest service company, and Live Corp for live export, and AMPC, the Processing Corporation. We do the R&D and the marketing. MLA manages the matching funds from the federal government that go into R&D across the whole supply chain. So we work very closely with Live Corp and AMPC on R&D side. MLA is the sole recipient of the marketing component of the levy, and that's what drives our marketing programs both domestically and internationally. We'll go to the next slide. I just wanted to have a bit more of a global outlook, and we saw the value of the livestock industry in Australia. I worked out they were slaughter values that were put up before. These, when we start looking at our international trade, we measure volume and value at the point of export for our export values, and at retail domestically. So there's a little bit of difference in those numbers. We're also seeing strong demand in the live export side of things. We're forecast to export 725,000 head of cattle out of Australia this calendar year. And I was in Darwin last week with a group of stakeholders, and they're seeing strong demand. But we're also looking at not just what we produce here in Australia, but from those cattle that we do export live, how can we find higher value markets and market channels for some of those products out of those production systems to lift the value, because the competitive landscape in our live export markets has changed a lot as well. But you'll see that North America is our largest market, and as we saw before, America, Korea, China and Japan are our largest export markets. But we have seen strong growth in Southeast Asia, Middle East and North Africa. And interestingly, now that we have a free trade agreement with the UK, we're seeing some big opportunities in that market. And the big remaining free trade agreement to be done is with the rest of the EU. 300 million people, high value market, they value quality, they love it, they love dealing with Australia. It's a big opportunity for us. So just jump into the next one. So under the UK free trade agreement, prior to Brexit, our beef access to Europe was 7,200 tonnes for the whole of Europe. And that came about when the UK originally joined the EU in the mid-70s. And they've never been interested in revisiting that. In 2009, we gained access to the high quality beef quota, grain-fed beef quota, which was 48,200 tonnes, but it was open. It was mostly set up for the US to appease the WTO dispute. over HGPs. They still wouldn't accept HGPs in the European market, but they couldn't make it exclusive to the US, and we're very good at complying with international requirements. And we ended up shipping about 15,000 tonnes of grain-fed beef a year to the EU, as well as filling our grass-fed quota. Outside of those quotas, the duties are just horrendous. So with Brexit, dealing with one country, pro-trade, common values, that deal was done very quickly, and it's a very good deal for us. So 35,000 tonnes of beef access with no duties on day one of that agreement coming into force. It goes to 110,000 tonnes in 10 years, and that's just an amazing uplift. And then no quota, no duty after 10 years. So it's very good. 60 million people love our product. Yeah, we'll see how things go in that market. I had a question there.
Sorry, quick question.
Yep.
Do you see them changing their protocols around HCPs and also their price point? Are they willing to pay more than what we are other export markets?
Both really good questions. The first one is no, they're not going to change their view on HGP. It will remain a HGP-free market. I think the difference, though, the conversation for our industry is, can we get recognition for our HGP management system outside of UCAS and open up more supply? Willingness to pay, I mean, we're seeing the cost of living pressures around the world, and it really just depends on finding those right market channels within those markets. You know, I was based in Europe for 3 years doing marketing and market access work, and those top-end restaurants in London will pay whatever they have to pay for the real top-end product. They have in retail, they have a very strong Buy British movement, but they can't supply to meet the demand, and we just need to position ourselves as the preferred third country supplier. So that's the big opportunity for us. But we've got a very good reputation in food service, and things are going pretty well on that side. The big upside opportunity is in retail. So just jump ahead. So just on the ability to supply, we look at the herd numbers, and our herd is quite strong, and we saw recently ABS revise their herd numbers. Interestingly, that brought that more back in line with our own projections. So it's not a big disruptor for us, and if it improves the accuracy of the ABS method, we're very open to that. We are seeing the herd just come off a little bit in 2024. It's really dry down south, so southern WA, South Australia itself as a whole, big parts of Victoria and southern New South Wales have been in a fair bit of trouble. So there's been big turn-off, and we saw last year those turn-off numbers where, you know, it's happening up here too, where you had to book in cattle months out without a price. But then it changes really quickly because you book those cattle into 3 or 4 different plants and space becomes available, then becomes a ghost herd. So when there's a bit of an oversupply and the processing sector weren't keeping up with the ability to process those animals, that was really impacted the market last year, and no one really foresaw the crash. There was a hell of a lot of product in freezers in some of those major markets, and no one knows how much is there. So coinciding with a bigger turn-off, with tough labour, shortage of labour in processing works, and then a fair bit of meat in storage overseas was the perfect storm, as it turned out. But that product's starting to work its way through the system. We've seen an uplift in processing capacity, particularly down south, but also Dinmore down the road here, putting on a second shift. So that changes the dynamics quite a lot. There was about 3,500 cattle a week extra capacity down south, and just in one shift at Dinmore, it's about 12 to 1,500 head a day. So we're starting to see those pressures ease a little bit, and also the demand outlook looking pretty good. So if you just jump ahead, look, the female slaughter rate's always an important one to keep an eye on. That dotted line is the long-term average at 46%. So you start going above 46% and we start into a decline in the herd, rebuild below. So that's if you're looking at an indicator of whether we're in growth or decline, the female slaughter is a really important one to have a look at. Just jump ahead. And so carcass weights as well. You could nearly map the growth in carcass weight to the increasing proportion of our production coming out of feedlots. So we've seen a very large expansion in the feedlot sector. About 50% of our beef production is now coming out of feedlots. That's been a very big change. Back when I first met Matt, it was probably 30% of our production was coming out of the feedlot sector. So that's been a significant shift. Just go to the next one as well. So that's the live cattle export forecast, and we've certainly seen in some bigger turn-off years that 14-15, where we had over a million, 1.3 million head of cattle being turned off. We also had, 9 million, 10 million slaughter in those years. That was massive turn-off in those years. 2019, another big turn-off year. So things have subsided a little bit, but as the herd is rebuilding, we're starting to see the numbers pick up again. So, the outlook is actually pretty strong for live export. I know everyone's very conscious of the risks around live export, particularly with the decision in the sheep trade. There's no indications that the government's going to touch live export for cattle. So that's some good news, and they've been very supportive. So regardless of how much noise the activist groups make around this topic, we are confident in the longer term future for live export. But again, we need to continue to focus on animal welfare, positive outcomes, and continuing to partner with our key people overseas to build those capabilities and ultimately find higher value market channels as well. So we're just jumping ahead. So this is the demand outlook is strong, and what gives me confidence is this has a significant flow-on effect to us. So the US cattle herd is the lowest it's been in a long time. And our insights in market, and I had some US people out here for Beef Australia, they were saying, and they're from the Midwest in the US, their seasonal conditions have improved, but the herd is not growing. Livestock prices are high and people are cashing in. So they're seeing a lot of the older generation of farmers who don't have the next generation coming through deciding to get out while prices are high. So it's going to take a little bit longer for them to get into a growth phase. That means because they're 90% focused on their domestic market, 10% export, they will shift that product they typically export back into their domestic market. The demand for lean trimmings is the highest it's ever been. Or certainly the highest it's been in a long time. So we're seeing the 90CL indicator looking pretty strong. That underpins the cow market here in Australia. So you start looking at those fundamentals being pretty strong, and then we compete head to head with the US in a lot of those major markets. So there's a big opportunity for us to establish those new relationships with new customers in key global markets and capitalise on that opportunity. And if we can hang on to them in the longer term, that's very good. What tempers that a little bit is what we saw with global interest rates, cost of living pressures, and there's still an unknown quantity of product in freezers, particularly in China. But we also saw more recently 5 plants relisted for China. Those suspensions have been lifted. And a new plant down south was listed for China. That hasn't happened for a very long time. So the trade relationships are improving on that side of things. And about 85% of our production is now covered by free trade agreements. So it reduces the economic barriers to trade and creates a more level playing field for us going forward. So just jump into the next one. And then insights domestically, we keep a very close eye on this because domestic market is still our largest and most valuable market. I quite like this one. This was out of our consumer insights work, and there's a whole lot of information in that space, but 88% of people who are increasing red meat consumption in this country are doing so for health and nutrition reasons. And there's a new term that was coined that strong is the new skinny, and protein is king when in that space. And red meat is being positioned very, very positively by fitness influencers who have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. You probably all follow them yourselves. But we've typically worked with GPs, nutritionists, dietitians as the trusted source of information around red meat. These guys have got so much more reach. They don't really care a lot about facts, but we can give them facts and arm them with the right information and the right language. So our partnerships in the social media space have changed dramatically over the years. But it comes always, what we put out there comes back to a source of truth. So the Good Meat website is a very important resource that has the data and evidence to support anything that we put out there and and the people that we partner with. So just moving ahead, I often get asked, and certainly have over the years, about what proportion of our population is vegetarian. It's stable. It's about 5%. About 1% of our population are vegan. The stat I love the most is that over 50% of people who identify themselves as being vegetarian eat meat. And so they're now flexitarians. So I think about that on Instagram they want to be seen as being a vegetarian, and behind the scenes they love a steak and a lamb chop. So that is really stable. Interestingly, for the vegan piece, I saw some data out of the US that 85% of vegans don't last on that diet for more than a year. And the most powerful advocate for our industry is a born-again meat eater that was a vegan. So we should embrace the vegans. We don't have to spend too much time on the vegetarians because half of them eat meat as well. And let's focus on the fact that over 90% of households buy beef, and 80-odd% of households buy beef every week. So when we start, jump into the next one. So when we start looking at our marketing campaigns, it's about making sure that beef is seen as a very important part for health, nutrition, part of the weekly routine, and it's about meal solutions and helping people feel good about what they're eating and not feeling guilty at all about anything that we do. So just jump ahead. So it's about convenience is still the big factor. People are time poor. It's about how do we make their decision at the retail shelf easier. By the time they're standing at that meat counter, they've made a decision to buy beef, and we just need to make it easier for them to prepare, to be confident in how they prepare it, and that they're satisfied at the end of the day because they're prepared to pay the price to get that into their basket. Just jumping ahead. I think what we need to not drop the ball on at all though is that animal welfare, so after price, so price is the biggest driver of purchase. And the domestic market competes in the international landscape. So higher prices domestically are a reflection of higher demand globally. So it's not a bad thing. But to keep the consumption, we have to make sure, we have to make sure that people are comfortable to pay the price. Quality is a big factor. Front of mind is animal welfare, and then sustainability. And when they're thinking about sustainability, it's often environment. But typically that's a decision they've made before they're going to the supermarket. So standing at the counter, then they're making a value decision with what's in front of them. But behind the scenes, animal welfare is at the top of the list, and sustainability. So just jump ahead. But having targets like CN30 have positioned our industry in a more favourable light with our consumers, and our industry has certainly taken a leading position on environmental credentials around our production system. So just jump ahead. So I think about that context of global demand, what's happening domestically, what's our ability to supply, to then also thinking about, well, how do we work with you as producers to respond to those changing customer and consumer needs. And setting up strategic partnerships has moved us from doing individual projects that technically are very sound. They connect with a priority, but on their own don't deliver enough impact. So we've taken a strategic partnership approach to working with producers to identify and unpack the priorities, and then have more of a collaborative approach to identifying solutions to those problems. So the Northern Breeding Business Strategic Partnership was one of those opportunities where you can then get the right balance between R&D and adoption, and focus on the big ticket items for Northern Australia. And this was driven off the back of fertility, calf survival, and breeder mortality. They were the three big ticket items identified, and those solutions are a combination of genetics, feed base, management, animal health, animal welfare. So it's changed the way we've been able to invest in trying to solve some of those solutions, some of those problems, and come up with meaningful solutions, and work and try and set up a network where we're working directly with producers. So we worked with NABRAC, the North Australian Beef Research Council, pastoral companies, private family businesses in that partnership. But I'm keen to, I guess, expand on that type of approach as we move forward. So just jump into the next one, Marsha. So I mentioned adoption, and adoption isn't a single thing. We have to take everyone along for that journey. So events like this are really important for me because it's how do we connect and make you aware of the opportunities of the different programs that we have. So large-scale awareness events. We then have some training programs, and you might be familiar with some of the Edge products, so Business Edge, Grazing Land Management, Nutrition Edge. We now have a Carbon Edge program, which again is trying to help de-risk how you enter into exploring carbon in your business and doing baselines and evaluating options available to you around the whole carbon piece. And then we get into some of the longer term activities, so producer demonstration sites and profitable grazing systems where we can partner with producers on the longer term practice change, bring your neighbours in and work together on adopting the latest outputs of R&D to deliver impact. So just jump into the next one, and this will be my last slide, but hopefully an important one. I've been thinking about how we frame up the next 5 years and giving some context, because we're not starting from scratch. A lot of our investments across genetics, on-farm productivity, through the supply chain are contracted over the next few years, and we know that they need to continue. But I also think we need to be clearer on our focus for how we deliver impact to you, our levy payers. That's fundamentally important. And the way I think about that is we move, like we've done a really good job, and you've got speakers today talking about the various investments and progress and new technologies that help our industry move ahead. But I think if we look at the consumer insights, our customer requirements that are continually changing, I think we're going to see brand specifications continue to evolve. There's 198 licensed MSA brands now. About close to 60% of our production is MSA graded. That quality is one aspect of value. Yield is the other component. And then there's a third more intangible component, which is brand equity. And the best example I can give of how brand equity creates value, so I was in a wholesaler in Brisbane. There was 2 strip loins, both MSA graded, both 3-star at 5 days for a grill. They both had a nice lid on the box. But one of those brands was going through to the point of sale and getting on menu in restaurants. And the other one was very much a trade brand. There was $10 a kilo difference at wholesale for those 2 products. There was $2 a kilo over the hooks being paid difference to the producer supplying the brand that had better brand equity, even though the quality was the same. So brand equity, yield and quality will be valued, and brand equity is developed on provenance, on credentials, on raising systems, and unique attributes around that product in that box. So from a producer point of view, how do we package that up into better price signals? So how do you get paid for quality and yield? And how do those brand specifications drive the right type of response from the production sector? And then on the production sector, how do we start with the right animal? How do we optimise it through its whole of life? Which target market did we breed it for? And the way in which that flows is feedback all the way back to the breeder. At the moment, our feedback systems go back to the last owner. We've tried to unpack that through livestock data link and getting information going back to the breeder. But we need to unlock that data access without compromising data security. That's a really interesting tension. But equally, how do we credential animals feeding forward through the supply chain so that livestock are valued more appropriately? Particularly when you look at how much of our production now comes out of the feedlot sector and how black and white and how broad those specs are for cattle going on to feed, and how much difference there is in value over the hooks of those animals, independent of breed, independent of how they were raised. The difference in value over the hooks is enormous. So there's a lot of money left on the table, in my view. So credentialing animals with animal welfare, with environmental sustainability, with even just basics of animal treatments. There's a lot of, you'll hear some more language around deforestation and customer requirements around deforestation. So how do we credential those livestock and have the systems to have that information flowing forward through whole of life into the production system so that they're valued appropriately through the system. So to me, there'll be incentives to produce more of those cattle that meet or exceed those specifications going forward, but equally more transparency in the supply chain, and we'll move from a supply chain to a value chain. So that's just the context, I think. Some of that's going to be very ambitious to achieve in 5 years, but I think we need to be ambitious as an industry. MLA, as your service company, is well resourced to be able to execute, and I think we've got the right willingness within industry to drive change that delivers practical solutions and impact to give you guys a good return on the investment that you make. So, Matt, I'll pull up there and happy to take questions, because I've covered a bit of territory and there's probably other things that I haven't touched on that you might be interested in.
Yeah, and do just remember that we'd like you to use the microphone for any questions, because at least that way it will go on to our feed. Just one from me, Mick. For me, the Australian cattle population is one of the most important things that drives prices, supply and demand. And we've had a change in numbers, a change in how they calculate the numbers. 29 million was always, for me, the really worrying tipping point. Like that was when we'd be booked out 5 or 6 weeks ahead. You'd get double bookings, triple bookings, and it really would put a heap of pressure on the buy market. Do you think now, with the change of the way they calibrate that figure, that's probably 31, because we're currently killing an extra 20,000 a week on the eastern seaboard. We've got a bunch of plants that really aren't at full capacity compared to where they have been in the past, and we're seeing really big holes in it already. So do you think maybe we can recalibrate that number to 31 million where we've got to worry?
Yeah, look, good question. It's a combination, isn't it? Because if the herd's at 31 million, but we've got a good season and we don't have labour issues in plants, and we can handle the numbers, and if live export's strong, is very different to if the season cuts out, it turns dry, we have some market disruptions, then we're in trouble. So when I look at the forecast slaughter turn off of about 8 million and live export at 725, that's back in line with more 10-year averages. So that's kind of where we're at. I think we've always struggled with accuracy around the herd. So hopefully the changes that ABS have made make it easier for us to be more accurate on those forecasts. Certainly it does bring it back in line with our projections, but there's not a firm known number as part of the challenge. So I think herd number's one, but what's happening in the markets, our ability to process, and season is the combination. So yeah, it's tricky. Yeah. And I know you live and breathe it. So.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Thanks.
Stewie Ball.
Michael, you spoke about the CM30 targets and sustainability, and also the provenance side of the equity in the markets. When do you sort of think consumers will have the appetite to pay more for products that actually meet them standards? And secondly, do you think producers will actually get paid a premium for delivering their products?
Yep, no, great question. So I think as it's at a few different levels. We're seeing a lot more demand on sustainability credentials from customers. So major retail chains, people like McDonald's, even I think all of our large pastoral companies are on the sustainability journey because of investor requirements as well. So we're going to see a lot more demand on ESG reporting at an industry level. When we start looking at are there premiums, it depends on how those credentials are packaged up as part of a brand. So I think if we're asking people, if consumers they're more environmentally conscious to a price point. But when we start thinking about credentials, it's the brand equity piece. Producers will get paid more if environmental credentials and quality and the provenance story are part of the brand equity, then there'll be premiums. So it's not going to be just one attribute will deliver a certain amount. It'll be packaged up with how well they position that in the market. Some of our customers will want it as a base level of entry to make sure that, you know, the fundamentals of their investors and their owners are met at a base level, and that might be at a whole of industry level, and how individual supply chains differentiate themselves will be where premiums are. So there's a level of maintaining market access at an industry level piece, and how we set up programs like LPA to have voluntary modules to just be in the game in certain markets, and then the supply chains will differentiate themselves and incentivise producers to supply. That's how I see it at the moment.
David O'Hare.
Yeah, going back to that live export slide you put up earlier, you sort of anticipated that in the next 3 years the numbers were going to grow. But on the ground, it certainly doesn't feel that way. It actually feels fairly stagnant, if not harder. So where do you draw from to get that information that you anticipate the numbers are going to grow?
Yeah, it's off the back of looking at herd numbers, insights from in-market, and working with LiveCorp on their forecast through the exporters. And talking to a couple of exporters last week when I was up in Darwin, they're pretty positive about how things are going. I'll be on the ground over there in a couple of weeks. There's a importer-exporter meeting, so I'll get a better feel for what's happening there. But it's also because I'm going to Indonesia and Vietnam, and there's been other markets in Southeast Asia that are looking to grow as well. So yeah, I'll get a better feel on the ground in the next few weeks. Another question at the back.
Angus Creedon.
Probably address the elephant in the room around our hump height with our breed. Do you see MLA or MSA being able to update their, as we get more data and we get more basically carcass data back in and we increase the quality of our product, do you see MSA adjusting their specs at all in the future?
Yeah, so data's key, and remembering that breed content is only one aspect of the model. So I remember back in 2009 when I was running the MSA program, I just started with MLA, and at Beef Australia there was the Hot Rocks restaurant, and it was supplied by the Kaminskis, who had they were HCP free. They had a rising planet nutrition whole of life. They'd been tender stretched. The product had been aged, and it performed beautifully. So I think there's a combination of factors in the model that. So hump height is a direct measure in the MSA model. It's directly related to the consumer century work that has been done. Can we collect more data? Absolutely. But don't forget that weight for age is probably the biggest impact on the MSA model. So having heavier cattle at lower ossification scores will nearly more than offset the tropical breed content piece, because it's around capostatin having an impact on eating quality. But we can age those cuts longer. And then there's some other interventions. Tender stretch, I mentioned, aging that product. So you can get a very good eating quality outcome, no problem. There's an opportunity, I think, so the Repronomics project has the most diverse genetics that covers a big range of the population. So making sure those reference population genetics is representative and you've got good linkage. And if we can follow more of those cattle through to slaughter and collect cuts for consumer century, then you'll have the full picture from genomics all the way through to consumer eating quality results. That'll give you a lot of insights as to, there might be cattle that, high fertility, still maintain growth. You can finish them off. Might even have a bit of marbling. That'd be nice. So you don't need a lot of marbling to have a big impact. And everything in the model is additive. So all those cattle are eligible, but it's how you lift the average index, and identify those animals, because if you look at your own feedback sheets, you'll see variation. And how do we produce more of those cattle at the top end? But you've got a lot to balance in your production system as well, particularly around fertility being a really big one. But very keen to continue to work with you all on that.
And there is actually some work happening at the moment with sensory testing on some samples that have come from bin project steers the year before. We did hope to have a report on that here today, but all our presenters were away. But that work is happening, and the new round of sensory testing may have some impact on the model, I'm led to believe.
Well, it's a perfect. The model's just a perfect way to commercialise the R&D, and as new information comes in, it all goes in. So it's very good.
Just one last one from me again, especially when
you mentioned
growth. Oh, sorry, do we have one here?
Yes. Marshall, could you just pop back to slide 14 for a second, please? 14. It's only past it. That one. Michael, just on the bottom.
I think it's the animal welfare one. Yep.
There's a lot of data packed up in none of these. Where did the data come from, and how has some of that not been broken down further when it's a large percentage?
Yeah. So when it says none of those 6 things came out as the top things. So this was a consumer survey. And so then they've said, here's the really important stuff, and then there wasn't enough significant difference with whatever else was on the list from the respondents.
And where did the consumer survey come from?
It's a Pollinate group do it through whatever method they've used for the last 5 years for us. They're just everyday consumers from all over Australia. Okay. Different age demographics. They're not the same consumers every year either, which is unfortunate, but it's the general trend of these consumer insights.
I'm interested in a little bit more about that slide, and I don't know whether you'd have the data on it, is how much is someone willing to pay above for a premium cut for, say, if their value is all on animal welfare?
Yeah, so this wouldn't be price related at all. So there'll be a specific.
Supermarket will be at some stage. If I'm going to be buying a packet of meat, my belief system is I want the cow to live a happy life. Am I prepared to pay for that, or packaging, whatever it might be?
Sure. So that's where we have to translate this into then what do we do about it? And interestingly, the animal welfare thinking and the environmental piece is typically done when they're outside of the supermarket, and when they're standing at the case, they're making a valued decision with what's in front of them. So they're related, but we need to think about, does it need to be called out, or do we need to make sure so the supermarket is just going to say, they're just going to make sure there's no questions behind any of the products that they have on their shelf, versus calling out an animal welfare claim that might mean that people think that there's an animal welfare problem on another product. So there's a bit of a trade-off potentially there. But this would be a very specific question that would sit behind this, or a group of questions to come up with this chart, and we've got more details around that we can provide for sure.
One final question for me. Your thoughts on disease? So we saw some drop in prices with lumpy. Where does MLA stand on sort of that protecting our industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a lot of work. That was disappointing actually, that there was a bit of panic selling off the back of people claiming that foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin disease were imminent, when the risk profile hadn't changed that much because of the action happening behind the scenes. So the federal government made a lot of vaccine available to Indonesia, and MLA partnered directly with importers to add to that vaccine program, and worked with exporters and their importing customers to vaccinate as many cattle as possible. And there were millions of doses of both lumpy skin disease and foot and mouth disease vaccine made available to Indonesia, and then their government were also coming in from the top to drive vaccine programs. So there's a hell of a lot of work done at that level, and then a lot of the work with our peak councils, with the federal government on increasing biosecurity controls at point of entry. So foot and mouth disease is more likely to come in on people, and it's amazing how much food products people try and bring into this country, let alone on clothing. The food product piece was the highest risk area. So there's a lot of work of pre-screening passengers. Lumpy skin disease, in my view, was and still remains something for us to be very, very conscious of, because it's transmitted by airborne biting insects, and if they get down to Papua New Guinea, then they're not far away from our shores. So we're also then investing in mRNA vaccine technology for lumpy skin disease and foot and mouth disease, because at the moment the vaccines is a live vaccine and we can't bring it into this country. An mRNA vaccine looks very promising. So there's a few different elements of that, but absolutely front of mind in our animal health program.
No, just another.
Yep.
Just another one from me. We've seen kill costs for all processors in the last 2 or 3 years increase by 50, 60, 70, like, you know, from $400 a head to well over 600 for some plants. For the first time ever, we're seeing a lot bigger discounts in forward pricing grain grids for weight, like they're really targeting higher weight cattle. Do you see carcass weight as being a big driver in future requirements for most plants in Australia, due mainly to kill costs?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's the challenge we have. I don't know if you see it in supermarkets yourselves when you're buying product, just how thin steaks are cut now. So unit price per steak is a big issue for us. As we increase carcass weights, to keep the price per steak down, they're cutting it thinner, and then it makes it harder to cook it to a decent medium rare, if you like it that way, which everyone hopefully does. So there's a balance, I think, with carcass weight from an efficiency in a processing plant, because you're filling up hooks, and if they're heavier and you don't have to slow the chain speed down, yes, it's more efficient. But then there's I worry about centre of plate, and we need to make sure that we're still meeting the centre of plate cost point and still having a decent thick cut steak on that plate. So I see some opportunities for us in automation. It's certainly working really well in lamb. It's adding about $8 a head in value or reduced cost just through yield, and in increasing what should be on the rack is on the rack and not on the shoulder, for example, paying off those machines in a few years. Beef's a little more complex given the variation we have and size of the bodies, but we're working with AMPC on a program around beef boning automation. I'm looking at where can we reduce costs, and getting automation happening is a big one. The market will determine where the optimum weights are, I guess, because I've seen over the years where we've seen a lifting in what is now the average considered a supermarket type body, and probably less incentive to produce those really heavy end carcasses and more of a sweet spot in grids. So
and that's what seems to be more of a sweet. They just don't want them under 300 kilos anymore.
Yeah. But that sort of 300 to 340 kilo carcass sounds pretty ideal. But there's been, there used to be a hell of a lot of 400 kilo plus bullocks coming through that we're seeing a lot less of these days. But yeah.
Thanks, Mick. Any more questions? Brett Kane, welcome.
Interesting. Sorry, I come in a bit late. But do you really think the efficiency of the industry is going to be rewarded by having heavier carcasses? Like the industry, if we're looking at carbon neutral, and you can say that going into the feedlot's more efficient than on grass, realistically, the industry can't be looking at heavier carcasses. And I understand from Matthew's point of view that from the processor, they love it. The feedlotters, they love having them there for 100 days. We really have to get more efficient in the whole system. Yeah,
and absolutely. So, and this is important when you're considering your MSA outcomes as well, because if we can get cattle to slaughter at a younger age, that's enormous from an emissions footprint point of view as well. So getting them heavier, younger is really important. I think that's where the feedlot sector comes in, because you know, it's you're managing nutrition at the last in the last period. But days to slaughter is really important. But Matt's just talking about the efficiency through a processing sector. So there's going to be you know, I think the value-based pricing piece and the sweet spot of a grid is what we'll need to hit. So yes, but there's still, yeah, there's still a balance between kilos of production as well. But that comes from efficiency from a fertility point of view, I think, as well.
Is that just about all for me? Well, thank you very much, mate. Absolutely
Brilliant.
wonderful.
Thank you.